The year was 1568, deep within the heart of Constantinople, a city of glittering domes, marble courtyards, and shadows that stretched long after sunset. The reign of Sultan Selim II was one of wealth and conquest, but beneath its golden facade festered an empire of paranoia. Whispers of betrayal were treated as daggers aimed at the throne, and those who dared defy the Sultan's authority met the most grotesque fates imaginable. In the bowels of the Topkapi Palace, beneath layers of stone corridors where sunlight dared not intrude, there existed a chamber known only to the Sultan's executioners. It was called the Spider's Nest. Few had ever seen it and lived to tell the tale. Inside, mounted upon a raised dais, stood a horrifying contraption, the Iron Spider. Forged from blackened steel, it bore 8 curved hooks like monstrous legs, each designed to tear flesh from bone. The creator of this device was a blacksmith from Bursa named Orhan the Maker, who had once served the Sultan's armies with his masterful weapons. When accused of aiding rebels by supplying them with blades, he was spared execution on one condition: to design a machine that would make traitors scream louder than any before. In his terror and guilt, Orhan conceived the Iron Spider, sealing his fate as both craftsman and sinner. That autumn, a rebellion stirred in the distant province of Erzurum. A nobleman named Kemal Pasha had been accused of conspiring with Persian envoys to weaken Ottoman borders. The Sultan, humiliated by the betrayal, ordered a punishment so severe that it would silence rebellion across the empire. Kemal, once a trusted commander and hero of the Eastern Wars, was dragged in chains through the streets of Constantinople, his garments torn, his face streaked with defiance and disbelief. Crowds gathered along the route to the palace gates, their murmurs trembling between pity and fear. Mothers covered their children's eyes, while soldiers struck the ground with their spears to drown out the condemned man's words. "I fought for this empire," Kemal shouted, voice raw. "But the spider spins even for those who guard the web." His cry was quickly silenced by a blow to the mouth. Inside the spider's nest, torches flickered against the walls like the shifting eyes of unseen beasts. The executioner, Halil the Mute, a towering man whose tongue had been cut out years before for blasphemy, stood ready beside the monstrous device. His assistant oiled the hooks until they glistened under the torchlight, whispering prayers that the condemned might die quickly, though such mercy was rare. The guards threw Kemal onto the cold stone floor, his body trembling from exhaustion. Before him loomed the Iron Spider, its metal limbs spread wide as though anticipating its prey. He was stripped to the waist, his back marred with old scars from battle, a soldier's pride now reduced to a prisoner's shame. Sultan Selim watched from behind an ornate screen, unseen but ever present. His viziers stood beside him, their faces pale beneath jeweled turbans. None dared speak. The Sultan's voice broke the silence, calm but venomous. "Let this traitor know the web that catches all deceit." At his command, Halil stepped forward. Chains were attached to Kemal's wrists and ankles, pulling him toward the hooks. The Iron Spider's legs curved inward like the embrace of death. As the chains tightened, his flesh met the first point of iron, and the first scream tore through the chamber like thunder. The hooks pierced his shoulders and thighs, slicing through skin with deliberate slowness. Every movement deepened the wounds. Every breath dragged flesh against the barbs. Blood streaked down the hooks, pooling beneath him as his body convulsed in agony. The onlookers stood motionless, some turning away while others forced themselves to watch, a cruel theater of loyalty demanded by their sultan. Halil, emotionless, turned the crank that dragged Kemal across the device, the iron legs shredding more of his body with each pull. The sound was indescribable, the grinding of steel against bone, the wet tearing of human flesh, and the stifled moans of a man who once commanded armies. Kemal's vision blurred, his screams turning hoarse until they became mere gasps. Yet amid the torment, his defiance flickered still. "You'll make a martyr of me," he croaked, "but no empire stands forever." Halil paused. The Sultan leaned forward, eyes narrowing. He motioned for the chains to be reversed, dragging Kemal's torn body back across the Iron Spider. This time, the hooks found fresh flesh. The agony was unbearable, a living flaying. When his body finally fell limp, The chamber echoed with the clatter of chains and the drip of blood. The Sultan rose slowly, the folds of his robe whispering against the marble. "Let this be the fate of all who betray the throne," he said. "Hang his remains at the city gate. Let the vultures feed where treason was born." The viziers bowed, their faces drained of color. None dared question the sentence. Days later, as the sun rose over Constantinople, Kemal's body hung from the city's outer wall, his wounds darkened by the heat. The iron spider, cleaned but never truly cleansed, awaited its next victim in silence. Its hooks glimmered faintly, as though alive, hungry for more. In the marketplace, whispers spread among merchants and travelers. Some claimed they could still hear screams echoing from the palace at night. Others said the spider moved on its own when left alone, shifting its iron legs as if tasting the air for blood. But the most terrifying rumor of all was that Sultan Selim had ordered Orhan the Maker himself to face his own creation next, for the Sultan feared no man who had once imagined such horror. And deep within the palace cellars, where rats feasted on forgotten bones, Orhan sat in chains, staring into the dark, listening to the faint creak of metal that never slept. The iron spider, it seemed, had begun to weave a new web. The echo of Kemal Pasha's screams still haunted the palace corridors long after his body had been displayed for the crows. The Sultan's court had returned to its daily rhythm of banquets and petitions, but beneath the marble calm, dread crawled like an unseen insect. Every servant, every soldier, every vizier now feared the whisper of accusation, for in the Ottoman Empire of Sultan Selim II, suspicion was death. In the damp dungeons beneath Topkapi, Orhan the Maker sat shackled to the wall, the same man who had forged the iron spider with trembling hands. His beard was matted with dust, his eyes hollow from nights without sleep. He had heard of Kemal's execution, every detail carried to him by the cruel gossip of guards. The description of torn flesh and bone had broken something inside him. He realized that his creation had not merely killed, it had devoured the man's soul. One morning, footsteps echoed through the corridor. The iron door swung open, and a court messenger entered, holding a parchment sealed with the royal crest. "By the decree of His Imperial Majesty, Sultan Selim Khan, you are summoned before the court," he announced coldly. Orhan's heart sank. He knew what that meant. Dragged through the halls of the palace, Orhan blinked against the blinding sunlight. The same people who once praised his craft now turned away in disgust or pity. He was brought to the imperial court, a vast chamber adorned with carpets and gold, where the Sultan sat upon his throne like a god among men. The Sultan's gaze was sharp, cold, and unreadable. "Orhan of Bursa," he began, "you have forged a tool of justice that serves the empire well, but it was also born from your treachery, a debt unpaid." "My Sultan," Orhan stammered, bowing low, "I built it only to serve your will. I never raised a hand against your reign." The Sultan's lips curled faintly. "And yet," he said, "you gave the rebels weapons. You armed those who dared to question my crown. Perhaps your spider should taste its maker." The words hung in the air like venom. Gasps rippled through the court. Even the viziers, accustomed to cruelty, looked uneasy. To execute a craftsman in his own device was both poetic and monstrous, exactly as the Sultan intended. That night, guards led Orhan back down to the spider's nest. The torches flickered, revealing the dreaded iron spider once more, silent, gleaming, waiting. Halil the mute stood beside it, his massive form unshaken. The hooks had been polished until they shone like moonlit blades. Orhan fell to his knees, weeping. "Please, I beg you, I created it out of fear. Do not let it take me too." His voice broke, echoing in the stone chamber. But Halil's expression did not change. Orders were orders. The mute's hands, scarred and steady, began preparing the device. The chains clinked. The hooks were positioned. And as the Sultan entered, robed in black this time, even the air seemed to grow heavier. "You built it to make men confess," he said softly. "Let us see if it will make you pray." Halil forced Orhan onto the dais. His arms were pulled wide, his ankles bound. The first hook pierced his shoulder, and the scream that followed was like a plea from the depths of hell. The iron spider bit deep, tearing through muscle, shredding the skin of its own creator. Orhan's cries filled the chamber. "Mercy, I swear to you, I only wished to live." But the Sultan watched with cold fascination, as though studying his reflection in the blood-streaked metal. "There is no mercy for those who give birth to nightmares," he said. Halil turned the crank slowly, dragging Orhan's body across the curved hooks. The flesh peeled away in strips, blood spilling in hot streams across the floor. The metallic scent filled the air, thick and suffocating. The sound of tearing meat mingled with the rattling of chains. Between gasps of agony, Orhan shouted words that froze even the executioner. "It's cursed," he screamed. "The spider moves on its own. It drinks blood even when no one feeds it." His words dissolved into a howl as the iron tore deeper. But the Sultan's face betrayed the faintest flicker of unease. When Orhan finally fell silent, his body mangled beyond recognition, Halil stepped back. The iron spider glistened wetly, its curved legs slick with crimson. But then, a sound. A low, metallic groan. The hooks trembled. One of the spider's iron legs shifted ever so slightly, though no one had touched it. Halil froze. The assistant stared, wide-eyed. Even the Sultan took an involuntary step back. "What was that?" he hissed. No one answered. The spider creaked again, the sound like a creature breathing through iron lungs. "Leave it," the Sultan ordered sharply. "Seal the chamber. No one enters until dawn." His voice, though steady, carried the edge of fear. He turned and left swiftly, the hem of his robe dragging streaks of Orhan's blood across the marble. That night, in the silence of the palace, the guards stationed near the dungeon heard strange noises, scraping metal, faint rattling, and what some swore were whispers. When they opened the door at sunrise, the torches had all gone out. The iron spider stood as before, but the floor beneath it was slick with fresh blood. Halil's body was found nearby, lifeless, eyes wide open in terror. His chest bore deep gashes that matched the spider's hooks. Yet no one had entered the chamber. The chains that had bound Orhan's corpse were empty. His body had vanished. Panic spread among the palace guards. Some claimed Orhan's spirit had been consumed by the spider, that his soul now lived within the iron, seeking vengeance. Others said it was the will of Allah punishing their cruelty. When word reached the Sultan, his fury masked his fear. "Burn the chamber," he ordered. "Melt the spider into nothing." But the blacksmiths who entered the dungeon to carry out the command never returned. By sunset, smoke drifted faintly from beneath the palace, though no fire had been lit. The iron spider, once thought a tool of terror, had become something else entirely, a creature born of pain, hunger, and vengeance. And deep below the marble floors of Topkapi, its metal legs began to stir. By dawn, the palace had turned into a fortress of whispers. Servants refused to go near the lower halls. Guards stationed near the dungeons swore they heard the clinking of chains and the dragging of iron long after midnight. The Sultan's ministers urged him to bless the palace with holy water, but Selim II dismissed it as superstition, though his sleepless eyes betrayed the truth. The Sultan had ordered the iron spider destroyed, yet the chamber now lay sealed under heavy stone, guarded day and night. Still, the smell of iron and smoke drifted from the cracks in the floor, as if something inside still breathed. The few men brave enough to approach the door said they felt warmth emanating from it, like the furnace of a blacksmith still burning. Then came the first disappearance. A guard assigned to the dungeon, a young man named Yusuf, failed to report for duty. When his comrades went searching, they found his helmet near the entrance of the spider's nest, dented, slick with blood. His body was never recovered. That night, the Sultan called his court priest Sheikh Rahman to perform a ritual cleansing. The old man arrived with incense, sacred verses, and trembling hands. "Majesty," he warned, "blood has given birth to something unholy. When human cruelty feeds metal, it ceases to be an object and it becomes alive." The Sultan scoffed but said nothing. Fear had begun to settle beneath his arrogance. As Rahman descended into the dungeon with 2 guards and a torch, the palace fell into silence. Minutes passed, then a scream. It was not human. It was a shrill, metallic wail that shook the very stones. When soldiers burst into the stairwell, smoke poured out from below, thick and black. Of Rahman and his guards, nothing remained but shredded robes and a smear of blood that led back into the darkness. The Sultan's composure finally shattered. "Seal it forever," he ordered. "Let the spider die in its own web." Builders were summoned to wall off the lower level. Bricks and mortar sealed the iron door, prayers were carved into the stone, and guards were forbidden to speak of what had transpired. But as the last torch was extinguished, a faint sound rose behind the wall, the creak of metal shifting, followed by a slow, rhythmic drag. Weeks passed. The empire outside carried on, wars, markets, proclamations, but the palace itself seemed cursed. Horses reared when brought near the gates, and servants complained of nightmares filled with eight-legged shadows. Some claimed to see reflections of movement in the marble floors, like spider legs crawling beneath the stone. One stormy night, lightning split the sky above Constantinople, shaking the palace walls. The guards on duty heard the rumble of falling stone deep below. When morning came, the walled-off passage was gone, not broken from the outside, but torn open from within. The iron bars bent outward, as though something massive had pushed through. Panic consumed the court. The Sultan ordered every entrance to the dungeon sealed again, but it was too late. One by one, people began to vanish. The captain of the guard was found torn apart in the courtyard, his body splayed open as if dragged by claws. A maid was discovered hanging upside down from a chandelier, blood dripping in thin streams down her face. The physicians whispered that the wounds were too precise, too deliberate, as though inflicted by something with purpose. In the throne room, Selim sat sleepless, clutching a dagger. His once proud empire of marble and gold now felt like a tomb. He ordered the court historian to erase every mention of the iron spider, but the story had already escaped the palace, carried by terrified survivors into the city streets. Mothers warned their children not to wander after dark, lest the spider take them too. One night, as thunder rolled and the torches burned low, the Sultan heard it, the faint, dragging scrape of metal against stone. It came from behind the throne. He turned slowly, heart pounding. The floor cracked. From the shadows emerged 8 jagged limbs glinting in the flickering light. The iron spider, its hooks now fused with fragments of bone, rose like a nightmare given life. The Sultan stumbled backward, whispering prayers, but the creature moved with terrifying grace. Its legs clanged softly as it advanced, each movement echoing the sound of the crank that once tore men apart. As he fled toward the door, a hooked leg lashed out, slicing through silk and flesh alike. His scream filled the hall, the same scream he had once demanded from others. When the guards finally broke into the throne room, they found only silence. The Sultan's throne was overturned, his crown lying in a pool of blood. On the marble floor were 8 long scratches leading toward the palace gates. And in the years that followed, whenever a storm darkened Constantinople, people swore they could hear the grinding of iron on the wind, the sound of the spider still crawling somewhere beneath the city, weaving its eternal web of vengeance.